My name is Melissa Ziobro, and I am the Specialist Professor of Public History at Monmouth University in West Long Branch, New Jersey. Today is June 6th, 2022. We are here today with Elsalyn Palmisano for an interview project organized by the Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference, New Jersey Caucus, intended to document the history of MARAC as it celebrates its 50th anniversary. This interview is being recorded with the permission of all participants. Elsalyn, can you just verbally confirm for me that you do indeed consent to the recording?
Yes, I do.
All right, so tell us a little bit about your early life. Where and when were you born and raised?
Okay, my early life. I was born in Corvallis, Oregon. Okay, why was I out there? My father and mother drove out there when my father was stationed there before he then came back a month after I was born to be shipped overseas. He was a captain in the medical corps. We moved back then to New Jersey. My mother and I, were in New Jersey, and when my father returned from service, he set up a medical practice. He was a doctor. He set up a medical practice in a little town called Runnymede. Now, Runnymede is very historic. If you know, that's where the Magna Carta was signed in England in 1215, I believe. But Runnymede is in Camden County. And we lived on the Black Horse Pike. We had a large home where he had his medical practice next door. And I have two sisters that are younger. Okay. My mother was a teacher.
And what was your childhood like?
It was very idyllic. It was, we were able to roam free. There was always books and art and music in our homes. And basically, we spent our summers down at the Jersey Shore at we're at Brant Beach. For years, we had a sailboat called the Three Sisters, and we loved it. I mean, I have to be near the ocean, even to this day. And we then went to Stone Harbor for years, Stone Harbor and Cape May, for years in between traveling. I went to I went to public schools all the way, basically elementary schools, yes. Walked to school. There was no school busing. Walked a mile and a half to school, walked home from school. And we were all in one class. No changing of classes, no lockers in the hall. Okay. I loved all my schooling, elementary schooling, yes.
Now, this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but were you a bookish child? Did you love books? Did you love reading?
I did. As I said, the house was always with books. But I grew up with Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, Clara Barton, the National Geographic, Look magazine, Life, things like that. I did not really go into a library until I got to high school, because I went to Triton Regional High School, which was in Runnymede, and it was just being built. It was built. It had just been built. And we were the first class to go all 4 years. And so one of the major influences in my life for my further career was a woman by the name of Ann Walsh, who was the librarian there. And basically, I helped her set up the high school library at the age of 14, okay? And that changed everything, because all of a sudden I started reading things like the Ayn Rand, The Fountainhead, and Herman Hesse's Siddhartha, and the classics, and a whole different type of book. So high school, well, you want to know about high school? Okay.
Yeah.
High school was really just, it was marvelous. I was involved in choirs. I was in the history club. I worked on the school yearbook, the school newspaper. I had wonderful friends, went to the proms. I was one of the people that planned all the different activities, the science fair, you name it, any of the big dances. I fell in love, but my first real love, my junior summer. He was not so much a boy, he was an artist from Philadelphia who was in an art school there, and then my senior year was total bliss. Total bliss. But my teachers, my history teacher and my English teacher were the biggest influences of my career.
Do you remember their names?
Yep. Mr. Maloney was my English teacher, and my history teacher was David Towers. And the reason I mention his name is because, which I'll tell you later on, well, I was going to read you something that he wrote when I got an award, but that's okay.
Please.
Oh, now?
Yes, please,
Right
go
then.
ahead.
Stop it, 'cause I have to.
You want me to pause? Okay.
I have to get it. This is my history teacher. For my senior paper in history, I did something that was quite controversial. For my senior paper in history, I did, which I still have in fact, I did a paper called it The Negro in American Culture. Now, there were no black students in our high school of close to 800 or 900, but I did that. And of course, it was very controversial at the time that I would pick a topic, like this. And so that's one thing that made it interesting. But my history teacher, he wrote this to me after I received an award. History not only makes us humble, it tells us that humankind has a remarkable capacity to survive, no matter what happens to us as individuals. History is an enticing mistress and a never-ending search for truth and an understanding of what we are all about. And basically, that is one of the things I have followed and tried to live up to and incorporate into anything that I've done with history. So he was a big influence in my high school years, as well as the librarian, Ann Walsh.
I want to circle back to your paper topic. How did you land on that topic?
How did I land on that topic? Well, basically, when I was dating the artist at the age of 18, not only did I discover opera, but basically we used to go to Philadelphia to a lot of the little bars, cafes and everything, and the jazz musicians, and I was fascinated. And the English teacher, we read James Baldwin, we read Frank Reich, we read, those were part of our curriculum, but there wasn't enough, and I always sang. We were singing in choirs, the music of many black singers, and so hence I thought, this would be a great topic.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
You should read the paper. I have the paper.
You do have the paper.
That's the only one of my papers. I kept two papers. The other one I did in college for my senior thesis, which is even more interesting because I graduated in college in '65. The paper I did was on the self-made man in America, the Horatio Alger story. Now, there was never a women's studies course. I would never even have thought of doing something like that. But in '65, that's what I did.
So interesting. Now, you've mentioned a few times how your horizons were expanded a bit by the great reads you had access to in high school. So I've got to ask, what do you make of efforts to purge school libraries of certain books these days? And we're constantly hearing the news about parents wanting to strip certain readings out of the curriculum.
Well, I'm against banning of books, obviously. I mean, in high school, that wasn't a topic. I mean, that just, it wasn't where we went to school. Now school boards are coming down on that. I feel all libraries should be open and everything. I mean, when I was director at West Long Branch Library, I think the topic came up once in regard to back in the early 90s in a book we had in the library there, which I put in on something dealing with a gay, I think it was a penguin or something, some kind of a bird. And basically the mayor and the council were all upset. But basically the parent really wanted their child with this book, and it was fine. I mean, it is something. I used to have exhibits I would put up in September for band, book week and everything, and I never had any major, but I'm against, banning, books. I mean, totally.
Well, it sounds like you had an incredibly robust high school experience. You then go on to earn a BA in American Studies from the University of Delaware. Is that correct?
That's correct, but that's how it started out. When I was in high school, and when I graduated in '61, I mean, let's face it, there were very few things. You either became a teacher or a nurse, or my father said, you can then work in Woolworths 5 and 10. Bottom line is, I was raised in a house where my father and mother, they believed in the 4 Ds. Okay, to prepare yourself for the 4 Ds. This is what he used to tell his patients that were women. And what are those 4 Ds? Death, divorce, disablement, and desertion. Meaning, you have something that you are trained to do, and you can earn your own way. So, when I left high school, before that, I applied to the colleges, and I thought, well, I'll go into nursing. Sounded good. Father was a doctor, and so basically, the only way actually that I got into University of Delaware, because I was an out-of-state student, and it was very hard to get into Delaware as an out-of-state student, but they were just starting a BSN course, and I was one of the first classes to go in. So I started out in the nursing curriculum, and I went through a year of training and everything, worked in the Delaware Hospital my freshman summer of college. So I finished my freshman year of college and decided this was not for me. I did not like the math courses, and I had carried 21 credits each semester, and I worked all through college as well. My parents sent me $5 a week allowance. At that time, $5 went far, but I supplemented it. I worked in the library there at the Morris Library at the University of Delaware. I also worked in the music room, where I would, in the evening, be the one that would play a record or, Mendelssohn classical music. People would come in, listen. I would flip the records and everything. Or I was the cigarette girl in the scrounge, and I would sell cigarettes and candy. Got 85 cents an hour, which was supplemented with the $5 allowance. But what I did was I took 1 semester of an education course, and this wasn't for me. I knew I didn't want to teach, and then I discovered American Studies. And that, my sophomore semester, my sophomore year, and that turned my life around. I knew that was the field for me, American Studies. There was a program that had started at the University of Delaware. And don't forget, Delaware is near the Winterthur Museum. It's near Hagley. I was dating DuPont's, and it was Andrew Wyeth country and everything. And so basically, the American Studies, what I loved about it the most was basically the courses. For instance, when you took Jefferson studied President Jefferson. You studied him in American government as a president. You studied him when you took a course in architecture. You studied him as an architect. You studied, if you took a course in religion, you were studying him as a Unitarian. I mean, every way. And these things would all combine. It just brought it all together. And I was very fortunate that Marshall Fishwick, who was the president of with the Popular Cultural Society, he was my advisor, and he just made everything come alive. It was a wonderful program. But of course, what was I trained to do when I came out? That was the big question. My father, mother, because I sang through all 3 years in college and worked in a little coffee shop as well, where I would line up people like Joan Baez, the Mamas and the Pop, all these famous people. It's very interesting. I won't tell you about the Goldfinger party we had. But anyway, the big thing, my classmate was our current president, Joe Biden. So I graduated with Joe. I went to fraternity parties where Joe was and everything.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so he walked above me basically in the graduation line.
Wow.
Okay? True story.
Wow.
So when I graduated, I wanted to go to Europe to sing. And my parents kind of put the kibosh on that at that time. So basically, I guess in April or May of my senior year, just for a lark, I sent a letter to the employment office at University of Penn asking if they had any possible jobs. Okay? And I decided I would send also a letter to Drexel. Just thinking, because I had worked, I always loved libraries. And one thing led to another. The day after I graduated from college, I graduated on a Sunday. I went for an interview at the University of Penn on a Monday after graduation. I got a letter hiring me, and I became the assistant librarian for the Moore School of Electrical Engineering. Now, mind you, I had never looked at an engineer through 4 years of college with their slide rules. Okay, but I became the librarian, and all of a sudden I had 2,000, engineers right there. And there were only 3 women working in the building. There were no women really in the program, basically, at that time. So I was bound to end up with an engineer, but that's another story. But basically, the Wednesday of that week, I got a letter from Drexel telling me that I had been accepted into school. So one of the big decisions of my life was deciding whether I wanted to not start the job at University of Penn and go full-time to work on my master's degree in library science, or whether I wanted to go part-time. And I'm a firm believer that life is choices and compromises. I chose to go to Drexel Institute at part-time and work full-time. And it was the best decision I made at that time, because all of the courses that I took at Drexel, it was 60 hours. It was spread over, they were 15, you had to take 15 4-credit courses. All the courses that I took, I was able to use, not so much with my job, but my job I was able to use in the courses. So for instance, if I took a course in rare books, there I am in the Moore School of Engineering with the rare books, because that's where the ENIAC computer and everything was developed. So basically, I was able to use this special libraries. I did a paper, I remember, on the Pennsylvania Hospital Library, which was the oldest hospital in the country at the time. And I was able to use this. So it was a wise decision. And that's where I met also my current partner.
So upon finishing your MS in 1968, did you stay working at UPenn, or did you decide that was a launching pad to go look for something else?
No, actually, I finished my degree in '67.
Okay.
We got married, husband and I, we got married in '66, and a year later, in '67, I actually finished the degree, had a child the same month, got the degree, had our first son. We were married a year, and my husband got his PhD. It was a big month.
Wow.
But I didn't actually get the diploma until 1968. Okay, so basically, no, I worked for 3 years there at the Moore School, but then we decided to move. We had a child, and basically my husband was in industry working for a year, and he decided, I don't like industry, want to spend more time, with the family, etc. And basically we got a job offer at Monmouth University, which, well, now it was Monmouth College then. Now it's university. So we moved up to Monmouth County in 1968. And I fell in love with the county and the college and the history connected with it and everything that's involved with it. I still do.
Tell me a little more about what you loved about Monmouth County when you arrived.
Monmouth County, when we arrived, we came up here, as I said, in fall of '68. We found a little apartment because we knew nothing about the county whatsoever. Found a little apartment, stayed there for about 6 or 9 months, and then moved into a little what do you call it? Cape Cod house in West Steele. Monmouth County, I was being near the ocean, had to be the main, for me, the college was right there, only about a mile from the ocean. That was wonderful. And then also the park systems and the history, Sandy Hook, Ocean Grove, the beaches, and the people at the college. I started work. I found a job at the college. I worked as one of the periodical librarians. I was interviewed. I worked part-time, always worked part-time. And I could do that because of my husband's schedule, so there was always someone there when I was working. Okay? And basically, Monmouth College Library at that time, it was called the Guggenheim Library, and at that time, where I worked in the lower level, which was called the basement, the periodicals, rare books just were all over. Actually, it had never really been weeded out. In fact, the woman that interviewed me, who was the library director at the time, she was asleep at the reference desk when I came in for my interview. Okay? That's a true story. I won't tell you her name. I'm sure you can look it up. This was in maybe 69, 70. So I worked there, and it was great. It was great. I joined the, I also, at that time too, I had my master's degree, so right away I joined the New Jersey Library Association. And I met a man by the name of Robert Vandenthuysen, who was the New Jersey librarian at Monmouth University, or Monmouth College. And basically we became good friends. It turns out he had gone to Drexel as well. He was very much interested in history. And at Monmouth, we decided literally to leave where we were living in West Steele and move to a home closer to the campus. And basically it was right on Monmouth Road. It was an 1896 farmhouse. One of the oldest living mayors in the state, James Mount, had, it was his home, And basically, it was wonderful. And we lived there for 30 years, which was close to the campus. And hence, I started doing research. And I didn't know really that much about archives at the time, but basically, I researched the house, learned how to do that. I'm working at Monmouth College. Here it was, this beautiful campus. Of course, I was interested in the history and started collecting things all on that. And the Guggenheims. And then, of course, you know, Long Branch was wonderful. So the history stuff started, you know, piling up, abounding. I mean, really.
Now, you know that I want to come back and interview you another day in depth about your relationship with Monmouth University. But just give me an overview, a brief overview of Monmouth in the 60s and 70s.
Oh, Monmouth in the 60s I really can't, because we moved here in 68 and I started teaching then. Monmouth, well, let's put it this way. The new faculty that came in, the faculty barbecue, they served lobster. And that was a great big thing at that time. There were very few of the new buildings that are now up. Definitely, people may do with working in the original, some of the original buildings from the mansion. The library needed a lot of help. It was a very tumultuous time at the campus. Not everybody was happy with the current president that was there, and that caused a lot of, there was no faculty union at the time, and but there were a lot of new people that were being hired. We were all in the same type age brackets. In fact, my husband ended up getting tenure within the first 4 years. Now that would never happen today, okay? He came in to start the graduate program in engineering, which then eventually became software engineering. And I became active in the Monmouth Library, Monmouth Library Association, not Monmouth County Library Association, Monmouth College Library Association, very active, and in that. It was a time period, too, where the women's movement was just starting. And basically, I was very involved with that. Monmouth University, or Monmouth College, I should say, had no courses dealing with women's history whatsoever. A group of us got together. We started something called Monmouth College on the Move, Women, which was successful, but it was very frustrating. As time went on in the 70s, I ended up ordering many of the books I recommended and that were starting to be written on women's studies for Monmouth College. And I sat in on a lot, as a faculty member's wife, I could sit on any courses I wanted. There were 3 choirs. I joined all 3 choirs. I was active with the trips that the art group used to take. I became very active as a faculty wife for the campus. I think a later conversation would have to be dealing with how the unions came about and how we were involved with the negotiations and everything.
Absolutely.
And with my role with some of the presidents there and everything.
Oh, good.
We'll save that.
We'll save that for another day, for a Monmouth Memories interview.
Yeah.
So, your career. Thus far, we've talked about your work at UPenn, and you move over to Monmouth.
Right.
You have had a very long and distinguished career. Could you just kind of give us a thumbnail overview of how your career progresses? It does not have to be exhaustive. Just tell us what you consider the highlights.
Okay, well, one of the highlights was actually in the 1970s. I mean, I was still working part-time, but also I met through this gentleman who was the director, ended up the director, Bob Van Benthuizen at Monmouth University. I got involved with a lot of history, from tracing histories of our house. I got involved with the League of Historical Societies. I ended up becoming, in the 70s, their secretary for a period of time. I got involved with Allaire Park. I got involved with basically the Monmouth County Historical Association. And I met the man who had just been hired to be the director, Charles Lyle, in the early 70s. As a result of that, I became the first paid librarian, quote, archivist at the MCHA, and which boomeranged, because basically in the 70s, not only was the women's movement going strong, the same time I was working at the Monmouth County Historical Association, I also set up at Brookdale Community College the first women's center. So I became the librarian and the resource librarian for the Women's Center, and that was a big thing, because at that time women, were just starting to get back into college, and everything was just exploding. I mean, I marched with the National Organization for Women. We met at the Unitarian Church. We had consciousness raising groups at our home. I was the newsletter editor for the county. All of my papers from the National Organization for Women from Monmouth County, I ended up donating to the New Jersey Historical Society. But at the Monmouth County Historical Association, I was very fortunate. Charles supported, and the board supported, my library committee supported everything that I wanted to do there. I was there from 1974 till 1978, 5 years. During the course of that time, I did the first inventory of things in the vault. I literally worked out courses that we did in conjunction with Brookdale Community College. And I did courses on genealogy, how to trace the history of your house, because also what else was happening at that time in the 70s? Genealogy with the movie Roots was starting. The bicentennial was starting. People were coming in. They wanted to start historical societies for the towns here in Monmouth County. I ended up working with the New Jersey Historical Commission, very active with them, with people like Paul Stellhorn, Bernie Bush, Dick Waldron. The latter two are no longer with us, but we did like the first conference in 1977 on how to organize a historical society. I remember I spoke on how to set up a local history collection. So people were coming in, the genealogists were flooding in. At that time too, one of the things that was very upsetting to me, or discerning to me, was people were coming in, children, and the only woman they could ever mention who was famous in New Jersey was Molly Pitcher. And I thought this didn't sound right to me, so I decided to apply for a grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission, my first grant, and I taught a course called Women in Monmouth County History, or Move Over Molly, meaning there are other women in Monmouth County and New Jersey history than Molly Pitcher. Very highly successful. I taught it in conjunction with Brookdale Community College, utilizing actual materials that we had, actual manuscript materials that we had, diaries and everything else from the MCHA. Also, the same thing with genealogy. We got major collections in, and I ended up having an assistant work with me who was a genealogist. I mean, books were being published, local history books. I did many publications. We did the first collection of historical societies in Monmouth County. I did publications on the most well-known or the best sources for studying Monmouth County history. I did one on women in Monmouth County history. Little pamphlets that came out, a whole series of them. It was a very heady time to be there, and the conferences, that's when I got involved with MARAC. But
yeah, we're going to get to that in 1 second. Let me just finish up your CV.
Right. So I worked there for 4 years. Okay. So I was when I left there in 78, I was still doing lecturing on these topics, but then I also was working with the New Jersey Historical Commission. I worked on the guide to manuscripts. I shared an office with Dick Waldron, worked on the guide to manuscripts. I worked there, and then literally in 1980, I saw an ad in the paper for a librarian position at Jersey Shore Medical Center in the Ann May School of Nursing. Now, that was interesting because here I had dropped out of the nursing field, but this is the only job I ever actually applied for in my life. Everything else, except for the one at Penn, came through word of mouth. So I applied, I got the job, and I became a faculty member of the Ann May School of Nursing. I was the only non-nurse, aside from the nutritionist, who was on the faculty. It was unbelievable. It was a special library. I loved it, and that went on. I worked there for 8-9 years. In fact, the woman that I hired as my assistant in 1980, here we are 40 years later, and she is still there. But I worked with the alumni. I put together exhibits. I worked with archives for the Alumni Association. For the hospital. I was using all of the things that I learned and was passionate about in doing this for the hospital. In fact, I did the same thing with all of the historical societies that I belonged to. I ended up becoming a life member of the Shrewsbury Historical Society, Long Branch, West Long Branch, and Ocean Township. All of the historical societies. After I left there, why did I leave? I always loved new challenges. So I had moved to the Ann May School of Nursing Library 3 times, and it was the time where they were going to start cutting staffs, budget things, so they were going to cut 2 of my staff. I remember going to the director of the hospital, and I said, "Do you want to do your own typing?" And basically I didn't, and because he was going to cut my assistant, and so basically I decided, I had moved it 3 times, time for a new challenge. So I left there in 88, and then I did a lot. I've always done volunteer work with all of these jobs. I started volunteering more over at Monmouth Medical Center. Oh, I should say that at that time I was very active with all of my professional associations. And the time that I was at Jersey Shore, I was involved, of course, with the Medical Library Association and with the staff at Monmouth Medical Center, the library there. The library at Monmouth Medical Center, the gentleman was there at the time, really didn't have a good nursing collection. So I ended up recommending and working with them to establish a nursing collection at their library, Monmouth Medical. But at the same time, Monmouth College had just started a nursing program. So I used, they used my services. I recommended many of the books that they started with and helped them with the nursing department get off the ground at Monmouth College. At that time also I met a gentleman, Fred Packman, through the Monmouth Librarians Association. He was leaving a job. They were looking for another person to work at Monmouth Medical Center. I recommended him for the job, and basically, he got the job there, and basically we've been stead-friend colleagues and consulting partners for years. Oh, then after that, it was now 1989, and the gentleman, Robert Van Benthuizen, that I had met back when we came up here, he had been the president of the Board of Trustees of West Long Branch, and they had public library, and they had been through 4 librarians in like 4 years, and the one right before me had only lasted 6 months. And he said, you're not working right now down at the hospital. Why don't you come work, for us? So I said, well, I've never worked in a public library, but it sounds like a great challenge. We were living in West Long Branch at the time. And so I ended up there 12 years, got the job, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Joined, the Public Library Association, and very involved. I was very active with the Friends group, the archives. All that was starting the same time, of course, that, what do you call it? What's the word I want? Not the,
Their board?
No, not the board. The Friends, we had an active Friends group, but actually, all of the historical societies and the other things that were going on with the county that time, I was very much still involved with. So I didn't really have a gap, because I was volunteering or working with still Brookdale. Oh, I knew what I missed. Right, I knew there was not. I was also a librarian in the early 1980s for Brookdale Community College. I was a media specialist. So the same time I was working at Trenton, I would drive to Trenton at 8 o'clock in the morning, twice a week, to work at the commission. But at the same time, then those same days, I would leave and then work as a librarian, media specialist at Brookdale.
Wow.
And I continued being the research librarian also at the Women's Center.
Wow.
Now, that was more a volunteer, but I got an honorarium for that each year. So I had really worked, I think, University of Penn, University of Delaware, which were big universities. Monmouth College was a private institution, which then, became Monmouth University, and Brookdale Community College. So they were my academic type of things. I also was for Sandy Hook, I was the environmental education consultant, and I worked at Sandy Hook through the Office of Community Services at Brookdale Community College. I've had a lot of different fascinating jobs, Melissa.
Very, very busy. And when I
haven't finished.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Wait. After I retired, I told you, life works in funny, funny ways. When I retired in 2002 from being the director at West Long Branch, one of the reasons, first of all, which I loved West Long Branch, we were the only independent library, public library in the state that was a member of the county system. Okay? So all the residents that lived in Monmouth and West Long Branch could use the services. We were not a branch of the county system. West Long Branch is now a branch. Okay? But after I left there, first of all, when I left there, I still had all my relations with all of the people basically that were on my library committee at Monmouth County Historical Association. Many of them had passed away, but a lot of them were still alive. And one of the people that I was involved with for years was George Moss, who was the county historian. George was also the president of the board of trustees, or the chair, at Rumson, the Rumson Borough Hall. And at that time, this was in now 2002 or 3, I guess 3 or 4, they were looking for somebody to come in to go through some files in one room. George had recommended me, and I was hired, and for 8 years I ended up becoming the records manager and archivist of the Rumson Borough, which was fascinating. In fact, I was there through the entire, the old house that the Borough Hall met in was about 18 rooms. I cleared out 18 rooms and worked with the state archives with a records retention program and Paris grants, and actually set up the Mr. Mark project that Gary Soretsky, I named it actually Monmouth Records, was it? No, Municipal Records at the Monmouth Archives Records Center, Mr. Mark. And so towns could proceed to have, I forget how many square feet, 10 square feet of space to store their records. So I made arrangements, of course, right away for Rumson and for Seabright. I ended up also being the records manager for Seabright. So this was now from up until about 2012, which was a fascinating interlude in my library career, but not with my archives, because basically I got those towns involved, not only with MARAC, but those towns got involved with the county archives, with Archives and History Day we exhibited, and in the regard to Rumson, we created the Rumson local history room in honor of George Moss, which still exists because Rumson built a whole new borough hall, and I convinced the current board of trustees of the town to, or the council to create on the top floor of the new building the George H. Moss History Room, which they did. But at the same time I was working part-time there at those 2 jobs, we had moved to a big townhouse in Long Branch, which was on the Shrewsbury River, not right close to the river, and I got involved with the Long Branch Public Library. So from 2004, they were starting to do renovation of their library. I always knew the directors from the library, so I worked with the current director at that time, Ingrid Brook, and basically I did a lot of photography, and we set up the local history room for the Long Branch Public Library and went through all the renovation there. I did that for up until we moved to Seabrook here, up until about 2014. But my big thing at that time was going on and becoming the consultant and archivist for the library at Monmouth Medical Center, working with Fred Packman. So from 2012 until basically the pandemic in 2020, I worked with Fred as a consultant. I've been there for the past 8 years as the archivist for Monmouth Medical Center, okay, and set up with him the big the archives and special collections room.
So you have been very, very busy. But when I was looking at your bio online, one of the things that struck me is it seems you always made time for continuing education.
Absolutely.
So in 1989, for example, you became a graduate of the Modern Archives Institute conducted by the National Archives and Records Administration. In 1996, you received a Preservation Development Certificate from the Rutgers Library School. I wonder if you could just speak to us a bit about the importance of continuing education in our careers.
Right. Oh, definitely. I'm a firm believer in it. Basically, when I left my job at the hospital at Jersey Shore Medical Center, something I had always wanted to do, and this all ties in with MARAC now and the archives and everything that was going on. I mean, basically, I had become friends with Arthur Breton, who was the archivist at the Archives of American Art in Washington, and with another gentleman who was the director, not the director, he was the editor of the MARAC newsletter, and he lived in Washington. So I decided, okay, you know what, I'm going down to Washington. So basically, in 88 or 89, I decided to take the 2-week course there. And I spent 1 week living with Arthur Breton and 1 week living with Don Harrison, and commuted in with them as they went to their jobs. And I proceeded to take the courses. And that was wonderful. So yes, I got the certificate from there. As far as the preservation one, that ties in with Susan Schwartzberg, because basically preservation was full force in the 1980s and 90s, and basically Susan Schwartzberg was the head of the preservation at Rutgers University through the college, for libraries school up there. Don't forget, in New Jersey, Rutgers was the only school at the time offering a master's degree in library science, just like why I went to Drexel in Pennsylvania. At the time, Drexel was the school offering the master's degree. So I went with all the courses. It wasn't a 2-week or 3-week course at that time, the preservation course. We took courses like a day's class that was spread over a year or two. And myself, Gary Soretsky, Bob Stewart, and Fred Packman, I think we were 4 of the first people to come out of that program. I mean, it was excellent. And one of the things that I've always had is students from Rutgers. Even when I worked at the Women's Center at Ann May School of Nursing, I had also graduate students that I would mentor. At Long Branch Public Library, I mentored, I think, 4 or 5 students that worked with me with the local history room. They had to work 15 or 20 hours a week. I was there as a volunteer. I wasn't paid for that, but I mentored them. And one of the biggest satisfactions I feel in my life was being a mentored and watching and being able to get jobs for these young women and men, in the field, in the history field and in archive field, and to see how they have flourished today in those careers. And they have come back to me, or we've kept in touch, and how much they valued the experience and the time, that I spent with them. That's been a very rewarding experience, much more so than the big pay grades and all of that. I found much more rewarding.
Speaking of mentorship, what advice do you have for emerging professionals today?
The same advice that I gave long ago. When we moved up here in 1968, when I got my master's degree, I joined the Join Your Professional Organization. I joined the New Jersey Library Association. in 1968, so I've been a member of NJLA now for over 50 years. In fact, I just got back from the current conference, was in Atlantic City last week. I became president, literally joined the different sections that they have. I joined, there was a genealogy section, there was a history and bibliography section. I became an officer. I ended up, get involved, with it. The people that from all over the state there were my contacts, and the people that I relied on, because most of the libraries I worked with in the special libraries and everything, they were lone arrangers. I was the only person. Basically, so you needed the advice. I also joined besides the associations, like like MARAC. I don't know whether you want to get into MARAC yet, but join your associations. Join, for instance, we had in the county, there was the Monmouth, if there's a county one, for instance, in my field, there was the Monmouth Librarians Association. Join that. Join the state one. Join the national organization. I became a member of ALA. I ended up going to, when I became in the medical field, joined the Medical Library Association. I joined the League of Historical Societies. I've always, to this day, I'm still an individual member of the League of Historical Societies. Join if you're interested in history and archives, go in your town, volunteer. I found too, many people, even if you don't have a job, I know it's hard for some people to find jobs, I've always recommended to them, or given them advice, if you're interested in history, join your local, volunteer for your local historical society. Some of the people that worked with me as volunteers, not worked with me, were volunteers. If I had a job opening, who do you think I suggested to apply for the jobs that I ended up hiring? Because they were right there. I have talked to too many women and men, especially even when they leave the field. They drop out of their associations. And I think it's a big mistake. The association needs the value that people of my age and of my type of education background can give to them today. That's why, Melissa, you and I connected right away, because, and I know you don't want this in your interview, because you remind me of myself when I was your...
Well, that is a very high compliment indeed. So speaking of joining the professional organizations, let's drill down now into MARAC, right? Yeah. So you've mentioned MARAC a little bit. Around what year would you say you got involved in MARAC?
I got involved in MARAC in 1974. I went to my first conference, which was held up in Newark, New Jersey, at the Gateway Downer Motor Inn, okay? It was a 3 or 4 page program. That was it. It was probably, I don't even remember how much it cost. Maybe it was $2 or $3 to go. That was my first one, and basically there were, I don't even think there were tours at the time. I don't think there were tours. I don't know. Oh, there was a tour. There was a midnight tour, I remember, of Newark. Charles Cummings from Newark Public Library did it. But right there, that's where I met, right off the bat, people like Ron Becker, who, some of the main people that are with MARAC today that are still there. Many of them, unfortunately, have died. But that led to the next thing, which was, all of a sudden, here it is, 1974, I was at the Monmouth County Historical Association. So there was a group of people, all of a sudden, these archivists, I was learning from all over the state where they were, we would get together, okay? There were people that were just getting together, seeing other repositories, writing grants. I mean, a tremendous help. The next one that I attended, the next one that was in New Jersey, was, believe it or not, in Atlantic City. And the interesting thing about this one was that it was at the Marlborough Blenheim Hotel, which was, we were the last conference to go in there before it was bulldozed down for a casino. At that one, I mean, the room rate, I have to tell you, the room rate was $25 a night for a room. Our registration fee was about $3. I mean, and I did a program there. The program was on women's history sources. And I ended up, doing what about my grant and the course I taught. And I was on a program with the woman, Virginia Purdy, who was the head of she was with the National Archives and Records Service, and two other women that ended up doing the definitive bibliography on women's history sources at that time. I was involved in some way, Melissa, with MARAC through every one that they've had here in New Jersey. I did many programs for them in 1980, was it 1980 or 86? No, 1980. As I said, preservation became a hot topic. And you forgot about in here the CAPES program. I don't know whether that was something
we're going to get there in a moment.
Because that ties in with a lot of this. Basically, in 1980, I think it was, I was on the local arrangements program, and I'm not sure whether that was the year that, was it 1980 or 1990? I think, no, 1986. I remember I was the caucus chair, and I made the big mistake of, at that time in 86, doing a program, chairing a program and doing a talk on nursing archives while being the chair, and also handling registration for the whole kit and caboodle. Okay? I mean, and that was held in Princeton. Okay? And the, let's see, 1990 meeting, I did the first program on capes, that as a speaker and everything. As I said, I was on the local arrangements for all of them. But the capes program, since it started in 1989, this was one of the first times that we had something there. And then, if you really want to know, the big program was in 1993. This was celebrating archival diversity. It was held in Long Branch. We called it Archives by the Sea. It was in spring of 1993, and there were a lot of firsts for it. I was in chair of the local arrangements, and Tom Frusciano was in charge from Rutgers of the program. And we were the first group to go into the Ocean Place Hotel in Long Branch, which we were able to get special rates. Carl Niedinger, who was the archivist, he was going to be the outgoing chair in 93, and I really wanted to do it up big for him. So basically, as I said, we were the first conference we booked at the Hilton. We had close to 300 attendees. We were able to do tours at all of the places that I had been involved with. Ocean Grove, I was a life member at the Ocean Grove Historical Society, and I was also the archivist for the Ocean Grove Historical, along with Fred Packman. We were the co-archivists. We went to Ocean Grove. We went over and toured the Monmouth University Guggenheim Library. We went up to Sandy Hook. We went out to MCHA. We hit all of the high points. We had over the biggest number of exhibitors at that time. Fred Packman was in charge of exhibits. We had 17 exhibitors. One of the big things with it was that I guaranteed every one of the participants a room that had an ocean view. And everybody had an ocean view, and there was a full moon. So everybody had the full moon and the ocean view. I had George Moss as was the speaker. He spoke on, of course, the history of Long Branch for the luncheon speaker, which people loved. And we had hospitality on both nights. And we had a hospitality room, and we could have real adult drinks in the hospitality rooms. But the biggest thing about it was, of course, we had excellent speakers. The theme was archival diversity. We had an excellent program. One of the big things about it was that I had wonderful cooperation through the state archives, the county archives, the state library, with them sharing the cost of the conference. And that made a big difference. The cost was way down. I believe our registration fee was only $45 or $55. It was very reasonable. And the big joke was that, of course, Pier Village wasn't built then. There was nothing. So basically, where was I going to have a reception? So we had the reception in the hotel. And everybody used to laugh because I didn't order shrimp for the reception. I kept the costs down. But we brought in from that conference close to $15,000 overhead, and it was the most successful MARAC conference to bring money to at that date.
Wow. Now, these
I get that.
early conferences. Okay, so we're coming back, and my next question for you, Elsalyn, is today everyone can connect instantaneously via email, via video conferencing. Do our in-person conferences retain the same importance today as far as the networking and the information sharing goes?
I think they do, and even more so. I know on a personal basis, it's that one-on-one contact, the sharing. There's nothing like being able to sit down with a group of people at a conference and share a meal with them, a drink with them, a reception with them, to sit and actually see the work and dedicate to see it somehow live, to see them present their papers or everything and bond their poster sessions. I realize you can do all this today, as the pandemic has showed us. But I think groups like MARAC and all the professional organizations that I've been in, yes, are just as important. But I think one of the problems is many of the places where people work today do not have the funding to send the quantity of staff down. We, MARAC, as well as some of the other organizations I'm in, do offer scholarships. I mean, it's so important, especially for younger people, not necessarily younger people, but people that have gone back into these careers, to be able to not just work, if they're working in a lone place, where they're the only person, to be able to, go to these different events. And also, the different companies today won't give the people necessarily travel funds for many of these things. But I do understand when the pandemic hit, we had a wonderful turnout at MARAC for the digital, for the online program. Definitely. I think it's still very important.
Okay, good. We've talked a little bit about your role as the local area committee chair, conference chairs, but I want to talk a little bit about your CAPES role. So can you give us a little overview of the CAPES program?
Love to. Okay, the CAPES program started basically in 1989. The first one was done. Report was done. In fact, I did the first report. It was for Manville Public Library. But why did we have it? We started it, Carl Niedinger, Maxine Laurie, Dick Waldron. Dick, was the director at the commission. And basically, many of us, there were all these grants being given out. And basically, there was no way for the reviewers, myself included, I was one of the reviewers, to be able to really review some of these people's places where they were working, things, their manuscripts, things they were talking about. So basically, this came about, that we needed another, what's the word I want? Something else to be able to help the commission and the reviewers. So these three people got together with a lot of us that were in the field and based together. We got funding, seed funding from the commission, and we started the program. So that started in 1989. I was the 5th coordinator. I was the coordinator 2004 and 2000 to 2006. We had guidelines and everything. We had a resource list, guidelines. Basically, you did a 2-year term, basically, when I started. They were 2-year terms, guidelines. I myself have done over about 40 of the grants. I've done them for, or let's put it this way, people could apply for grants if they had New Jersey materials and they were open to the public. There were certain guidelines. To date, I happen to know that we've done over 550 of these surveys. One of the things happening today is you have new directors or new people who have moved to new facilities. They are eligible, or new collections, they are eligible for a second grant. Okay, so we have, at this point, we have 12 or 13 consultants. I've been a consultant, as I said, since 1989. The consultants have to be a member of MARAC. I mean, they are requirements for that, and I believe one of the interviewers is going to be interviewing the current, one of the people that's been the coordinator. I myself have gone to museums, libraries, medical centers, nursing schools, churches, all kinds of places. I'd say that basically Gary Soretsky has done the most, and Elizabeth Shepard and myself have done the most of these grants, of these different surveys. I find it extremely rewarding. I have done that and intermingled that with my other full-time jobs for years. I would either take a personal day off and do the work. It wasn't until I was the coordinator, after I was the coordinator, we had a survey done by Mimi Bowling to ascertain the benefits of the program. We also put together a template then. We decided on an advisory committee, which I'm still on, we did a template out that came about and started to be using, it was used when? From, I guess, the late, maybe from 2006 on, a template, and we did a resource list up. So all the consultants take that, on. I've had a lot of groups that have been very successful. The reviewers then from the commission were able to use these reports, and that is how the commission gave out research grants and some of their based on, I mean, you couldn't put in for a report, a grant unless you had a CAPE survey done first. So there's been a lot of highly successful grants. To give you an example, I did one early on in 1990 or 91 at Long Branch Public Library. I wasn't volunteering there yet or anything, but that grant they used, and they got then a microfilming grant from the state library, which was giving out grants at that point. And basically they got another grant to do some photograph of some scrapbooks, historic scrapbooks. Okay, so people did use them for many other places. A lot of the people that I did the surveys for, not the people that I worked with at the places for the surveys, it's just amazing. For instance, the Helene Fould School of Nursing, they went on and they applied for one, and then they had me back, and we set up an entire room for them with official dedications and programs. I mean, I found that many of the groups that applied were not thinking of, but they were coming upon major anniversaries. So, for instance, let's take Monmouth Medical Center. I was hired around the time they were starting their 125th anniversary celebrations. So I came in, we did, another application, or I didn't, Fred did. It was approved. They were able to not hire me with funds, but that grant enabled them to see that there needed to be work done. We set up a local history and special collections thing. Belmar Public Library, Belmar Historical Society, West Long Branch. I mean, I've done many of the ones in Monmouth County, many of the historical societies in Monmouth County. I did the CAPES grant for their institutions. If you go to Archives Day and you ask the audience how many people had CAPES grants done and how many were done by me, you will see a lot of them were done by me. One of the things that, so I myself have done a lot of them, yes. Even though I was the coordinator during that time, one of the main things that I did as the coordinator, I put together the first inventory. Right now there is a database now, but of all of these things, I worked with the commission. It turned out the commission didn't have a lot of these surveys were never sent to them. Unfortunately, one or two of the people, one of the gentlemen that was the coordinator before me, there was a lot of issues, let's put it that way, with the program. I got the financial stuff all straightened out with it. I got, the grants straightened out with it. The inventories, I reorganized it, okay? And it needed it. When I was the coordinator, I was also, was I working? I'm not sure whether I was working. No, I was not working when I was the coordinator, a full-time job at that point, no. Or was I? No, I wasn't. No, I was working up at Rumson, and no, I wasn't when I was the coordinator. But all of these things I did when I was working other jobs. And I loved it. I loved it. The people, to see what some of the libraries and museums have done with those grants has been remarkable. And the people, many of the staff that were able then to obtain positions, to recognize the importance of having someone be in charge of the local history room, or to even have an archives. Elizabeth Public Library, major libraries. I mean, they have now a person right in charge, These groups then started to exhibit at Archives and History Day, which was wonderful, Melissa. It's been a very rewarding experience. But for the past, when Fred Packman, who was actually the last coordinator of the program, his term kept expanding. So I can honestly say, too, I have worked with Fred he was 9 years the coordinator, and I worked with him side by side. He was the paid coordinator, but I worked side by side with him with this program for the past 9 years. Right now we have a new coordinator that just started this past year. The CAPES program, I did many programs at MARAC conferences for the state New Jersey Library Association. Many programs I did where I had speakers come that spoke. Also for Archives and History Day, we had programs. In fact, I had two that we did while I was coordinators there. It was wonderful. It still is. It's one of the most, it's still very much needed, and there are still people applying for the surveys today.
Are CAPES evaluations done by other MARAC state caucuses, or is this unique to New Jersey?
It's unique to New Jersey at this point. I mean, I know a lot of people have consulted with us from other caucuses of how they could set up. I think they have other type of maybe grant, programs in there. Remember, CAPES does not do artifacts, but the commission has another program that was set up over the past maybe 5-6 years, where they report, those groups go through the association, the New Jersey Association of Museums, okay, where we stick with the commission. And each year, the commission has been, we've usually gotten about $8,000 to $10,000 a year. Our surveyors, people that survey, believe me, I mean, some of the reports that I have seen and that I have done myself, they are, for what we get in an honorarium, we should be getting 3-4 times that much. For the amount of time that we put into it, that's the big thing that I found the frustrating part. Many of the places I could have stayed another day, okay? And it takes a lot of time. I always took photos too, with which I do a lot of photography anyway, but I always took photos with all of my reports starting from the beginning. And the photos spoke volumes, okay? In fact, right now, I'm going to touch on one because in 1996, Fred and I did the New Jersey State Library Association, which was housed in Trenton. Not much came of anybody following through on the report. And right now, we have had, with the New Jersey State Library Association, the person who was the current president, Kate Jaggers. There was a task force put together on archives and history and retention, and we are now with NJLA. Starting this year, July 1st, we have an archives history committee. Fred's going to chair it. I'll be on the committee. We have guidelines, and we've just put in for another CAPES survey because all of the materials have been moved from Trenton to the the Library for the Blind and Handicapped in Trenton, and Gary Soretsky is going to be the surveyor. We know there's over 300 boxes that have been dumped there and over 40 file cabinet drawers. He will be doing that in June. So this program is alive and well, and that'll be the basis of the New Jersey Library Association going forward with archives and retention and all of the different sections, literally saving their materials.
Wow. Would you say MARAC has changed a lot over the years?
Well, it certainly has gotten more expensive. I mean, I forget what the current, the last conference was going to be. The hotels have gotten more expensive. So in all ways, the meals and everything. But and of course, it's more diverse, which is great. They're giving out more grants. There's mentoring programs and everything. But what has stayed the same, I feel, as a person that's been involved with it almost 50 years, is the willingness and the volunteers. I mean, for instance, if there is a disaster, you will find, and for your library, you will find that MARAC members will volunteer to go help you. We're not paid when we give the talks at MARAC. We put a lot of time and effort. The volunteerism is still there. The camaraderie is still there. The bonding of people to be at a MARAC meeting, to give a session, to let their expertise, to write the technical leaflets, that is there. And I think that's the important part, to see new archivists and librarians go to a MARAC meeting and come away just totally to get that passion to come home with the ideas and everything. No, that has not changed. What has changed, of course, is there are many more programs on digital resources, and today, of course, you have your digital archivist. I know here at Seabrook, where I live, I have taken on the role, and as another archivist here, I do the archives for the Resident Advisory Committee. I mean, I've set up a finding aid, and I've obtained storage for us, and all the officers of the different, the 6 committees here at Seabrook, the secretaries send me their files. I keep it online. I keep copies of the shoreline, so I'm in the process of looking into getting our the newsletter that comes out monthly, digitized from IDI, one of the groups. No, I mean, it's a wonderful field to be in. I mean, and I'm a firm believer, Elizabeth, with all my life with a lot of this stuff. If you can imagine it and envision it and design it and enthusiastically act upon it in anything, any job you want, anything, it'll eventually come to pass. I've seen it in all my jobs. And I mean, you just have to be able to have choices and compromise with everything, along the way, with your family and everything else.
As MARAC looks to the next 50 years, do you think there are any potential roadblocks to success that they should be watching out for?
Well, I think one is definitely the expense of the conferences. The expense of the conferences, and I know there's been talk of going to maybe one conference a year. I mean, that's been a big topic instead of, for instance, at this stage in my life, I'm not going to a conference down in West Virginia. So I only go to the ones basically now that I can, drive, to. I used to go with the Rutgers used to have a band, but I'm not, expense. For those of us that are still working or volunteering, that are that are retired from paying jobs, if you want us to come to the conferences, you have to make them, more affordable, or else you're going to lose a lot of the older people that have a wealth of the knowledge and can mentor the new, beginners, so to speak. I think having a longer, maybe one conference a year that can be maybe, spread over 2-3 days, 3 days maybe, and then having more active things within the state. I mean, one-day programs within the state. I think that where your caucus can bring people together. I know in New Jersey we've tried to do that. For instance, at the New Jersey Library Association, many of the people that were there this week were also a member of MARAC. And we have, programs that, would appeal to both librarians and archivists. But I think, the digital, you have to be able to, I think, offer, MARAC has to offer, I think, digital components to this, that people with Zoom and everything, it was highly successful when they had the Zoom parts. I think that should continue, yes.
Now, you noted the importance of institutional memory, not losing folks like you and Gary who have been participating, right, for a while.
Yes.
So speaking of institutional memory, why were you willing to sit down and do this interview today? Well,
first of all, we had I knew you and I knew that basically your background at Monmouth University, and also Tara, was kind of stuck that screw in, come on, Elsalyn, and basically I've been a member. Ron Becker, really felt that I should too, and so did the archivist of the MARAC organization. Most of my things, all my programs, the programs from MARAC, the talks from MARAC, the actual newsletters are part of my Palmisano preservation collection over at the Monmouth County Archives. Okay. I wanted to. I had hesitation because I've really never really talked about my life before, or my awards, or I don't think.
You mentioned that you've deposited your papers with a few different repositories. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Okay. Well, I think I mentioned the National Organization for Women. That materials I gave to the New Jersey Historical Society, because at the time I wasn't really working at Monmouth County yet or anything, and that was the place to give them in the state. I gave a lot of my things to Ocean Grove Historical Society, things dealing with Victoriana and everything, because I've worked there as their, I'm a life member, but I also worked there, not for pay, as their librarian archivist for years. The Long Branch, when I volunteered and consulted with the Long Branch Public Library and we set up the local history room, all of my Long Branch, my Monmouth County, and my New Jersey collections are over there, okay, at the Long Branch Public Library. Big collections, Alyssa. And my preservation, why did I do that? Because that's where I set up the local history room, and they are still there. They are still there, my collections. But right now, I haven't, because basically I'm not working there now or volunteering there. So basically, I don't collect as much as I used to in those fields, and I'm not giving anything anymore to the Monmouth County Archives. My biggest collections are at the Monmouth County Archives. The Palmisano Preservation Collection, I have about 18 cubic feet there, and if anyone reads the bio that Gary did with that, Gary Soretsky, years ago when I started giving there in 1996, that collection, many people feel, and you didn't really ask me about Susan Schwartzberg or Roger McDonough yet, but that collection is really the biggest collection of preservation materials in the state. Also, I gave my Ann May School of Nursing papers there, dealing with the nursing school that people can link to. I gave my all the material on George Moss, my Moss collections, with all of the books that George wrote. The bicentennial, my bicentennial materials. I chaired the Monmouth County Bicentennial Committee here for a while, and I was the editor with George Goodfellow of the newsletter. And I chaired the Monmouth County Heritage Committee. Their papers are also there. That was the Heritage Committee for each of the towns here had 2 representatives. So it was the local group that I chaired. And that was and I received wonderful awards from the county of recognition for the work that I did with that. Those papers are also there, plus my women's history collection is there. I have a lot of things on women's history that I did, that I had put together for papers that I've written, for grants. I had gotten 2 other major grants, Melissa, besides the grant for women in Monmouth County history. I had a grant for the Seabrook women, not the Seabrook here where I'm living. But
Okay, so we were last speaking about the different repositories where you deposited your papers, and we talked through some of them, but there's a wonderful biography written of you available via the Monmouth County Archives website, and we're going to co-locate that with the interview. So anybody who's listening to this interview can also read that bio and see a full list of where Elsalyn's papers are. So let's move on. Our last topic here will be awards. You have won many awards over the course of your career. One in particular I want to talk about is in 2003, you received the 2nd Roger McDonough Librarianship Award presented by the New Jersey Caucus of MARAC, the New Jersey Studies Alliance, the New Jersey Historical Commission, and the History and Preservation section of the New Jersey Library Association for your sustained support to generations of library users in New Jersey and beyond. Can you tell us a little bit about how it felt to win that award?
Well, it really was humbling because basically Roger McDonough, his name, the fact that it was
Okay.
Wait. Ice pack falls on the floor. Please, can you get rid of that? Don't put that in it. Because he was the state librarian for more than 25 years. And basically Roger McDonough, Bernie Bush, and Richard McCormick from Rutgers, Bernie Bush being the commission director, they were the people that actually put together the New Jersey Historical Commission and everything. So, I mean, it meant a lot. And for me, I was the second person, but I was the first woman to receive this, which was wonderful. And I received it. Ron Becker presented this to me at, I think it was at an Archives and History Day program over at the county library. Yep.
That same year, 2003, was a good year for you. You were the first recipient of the Susan G. Schwartzberg Preservation Award. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, Susan Schwartzberg, in fact, we just gave out at NJLA last week another Susan Schwartzberg Award. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of that. Susan Schwartzberg was an unbelievable person. She literally started practically the preservation movement here in New Jersey. She was president of the Princeton Preservation Group. She got the preservation group started with the New Jersey Library Association. She mentored, I don't know how many students, hundreds of them up at Rutgers and through the library school. And she used to have dinner parties. I met her once again going to conferences and joining my professional organizations back in the 1970s. When we attended conferences together, we became friends. She used to have these dinner parties at her home. That's how Gary Soretsky and many of us met. Bob Stewart, Gary Soretsky. We would go to these dinner parties up in New Brunswick. We would all sit around and talk, and we bring something, and she'd provide drinks. It was great. But she did teach more than 1,000 graduate students as a faculty member of the library school. And she's the one actually was responsible for starting the preservation management certificate program at Rutgers. Unfortunately, when she was in China at an IFLA conference in 1996, I think it was 96, she got ill, passed away, and her loss was a very big thing. I had retired in 2002, and all those organizations that you mentioned decided to give an award in her honor. I was the first recipient. I was caught off guard when I got it. I was presented at in Atlantic City, I think it was, at a conference. There must have been about 700 people in the audience, and I got up and spoke extemporaneously about her. It was a very big honor. There was a lot of news coverage and everything on it. In fact, somewhere we do have the updated list of all of the recipients of that. It still is a big honor to this day. So that was, a good year. 2003.
You have won many, many other awards. We couldn't possibly comprehensively list them here. We'll have to do an addendum to the interview, but are there any that are particularly meaningful to you?
Yes. One of the most, one that means most to me is the one that I received. I think you received the same one from the New Jersey Historical Commission. That I got it in 1990. It was given to me by Dick Waldron. It was a close friend, and basically it was the award given out to individuals and organizations for contributions to public knowledge and preservation of New Jersey history. I received that award. That was like the Oscar back in that was like the Oscar in the state, I'm sure, Melissa, you felt the same way. I believe you got that. I think, Woodrow Wilson Hall, right? That was yes, I received that award in 1990. I guess the other one, couple of them that were very meaningful to me was in 2010. My high school, Triton Regional High School, presented me with what was it called? It was called I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. And my class was about 350, and I'm the only woman that's been inducted into the Hall of Fame at Triton. And what made it wonderful is it was held down in Woodbury in 2010. I took my father. My father had been the school physician for all those years that my sisters and I were in high school. My father was in his late 90s, and he was able to go with me with one of my sisters and my husband, and to see some of those teachers come over and talk to us was very, very meaningful. In fact, I spoke about my history teacher at Triton at that time, too, And then I guess, considering that I got awards from the governor and everything for volunteerism, in 2016 at the Long Branch Public Library at the Centennial Gala, I was given one of the Champion Awards, which was extremely meaningful to me as well. I got it that year. The mayor and his wife each got one. I had worked with the past 3 directors at the library, and I got it for establishing the local history room and donating my collections and everything there, and serving as a mentor for graduate library science students, interns. Basically, that was in 2016.
Well, I'm almost done putting you through the ringer here, Elsalyn, but one last thing.
Just a second. I have to ask you something, though. One of the things, too, besides the Capes, project and those surveying things, it's amazing the amount of other things that happened. The consulting work that I've been able to do just through word of mouth, okay? Let me just name a couple of the places that I think are,
Please do.
for instance, like the Red Bank Public Library. I mean, I went on and still stay there. Took them through their 75th and 80th anniversary. As I said, the Seabright and Rumson Borough Hall things, only because my involvement with MARAC, and this is what I'm getting back to, the American Journal of Nursing Company up in New York. I mean, I ended up doing a huge preservation project for Brookdale Community College. These were all, as I said, Long Branch, Monmouth Medical Center, Passaic County Community College. The point is, I've done consulting all over the state and able to use many of the things, the technical leaflet series, the handouts, and I promoted at all of these different places MARAC. And many of these people then joined MARAC, the people. And that's, I felt like, I carried on and spread the word about MARAC, which I still do, today, definitely, okay?
You just mentioned all of your consulting work. I mean, you have remained so busy, even though you are technically in your retirement, Elsalyn. So what inspires you to remain so active in the field?
The people that I see coming into the field, the people coming in, as I said, the organizations and the volunteers that are trying to keep their town's history alive. And they need, that, and then they find somebody like myself that can guide them with it. And it boomerangs. Like here at Seabrook, I mean, this retirement community will be 25 years next year in 2023. Okay, we had a big 20th anniversary. I was able to bring, get people to come out of the woodwork with things that they had saved, squirreled away, show them the importance of saving. We've done great big exhibits. Every month we did something in the banner, just bringing the people together and everything. I think MARAC, those groups, that's a big, I think they'll definitely survive. Okay.
Now, I cleared this question with you in advance, so I think it's okay. In addition to your impressive career that we've been talking about, you and your partner raised a family. So I think this is really important for current working professionals. What are some of your tips for balancing work and professional life?
I think I said it right at the top. It's choices and compromises. I mean, basically, I have 2 sons. Harris and I have been married now, 55 years, I think. But basically, having a supportive partner, okay? And we made the choice years ago. when Harris chose not to go into industry, to go into academia, so we could both share. I mean, I worked, when I was at work, he was with the children, etc., etc. Both our sons have gone on to, one is his PhD, the other has his master's. They're both in very meaningful careers with wonderful partners, and we have 2 grandchildren. But it's that collaboration that makes it all work.
Well, Elsalyn, this has been such a treat, and you have been a real trooper.
But I want to tell you something to end this. All of these things I've achieved, my 2 biggest achievements are my 2 sons, okay? They're the most important achievements in the world. All this other, it's wonderful. And I still have a lot. I mean, I love history. I mean, I'm right there with all the history books and historical books and everything. And I still belong to many historical societies, and I still belong to my professional organizations. That's the key for people, to keep them going, okay? I love to go to MARAC conferences. I mean, basically, I think MARAC conferences, literally, you get to see, by people going, you get to see a wealth through the tours of different places, I mean, different facilities. I mean, I think that's why I will always go to Monmouth Conference. I hope to go down to the 50th.
All right, well, we've covered a lot, but is there anything we have not covered that you would like to add?
I think we've hit the high spots, okay?
All right, awesome. I'll stop the recording then. Thank you, Elsalyn.
Jesus